Imagine the scene. On one side, the Red Sea stretches endlessly, waves roaring, impossible to cross. On the other side, Pharaoh's mighty army charges forward, chariots, horses, spears gleaming in the desert sun, dust clouds rising with thunderous fury. And in between, thousands of desperate people. Families clutching children. Elders struggling to stand. The cries of fear echo louder than the crashing waves. They are trapped. Helpless. Hopeless. But then, one man steps forward. A man holding nothing but a wooden staff, and a faith stronger than fear. His name is Moses. With a voice steady and sure, he declares, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord today." As he raises his staff, the impossible unfolds before their very eyes. The sea begins to tremble. Winds howl. Waves twist and pull apart. And slowly, miraculously, the Red Sea splits in two. A dry path stretches forward, framed by towering walls of water. The people gasp in awe. The soldiers freeze in disbelief. This is not just a story. It's a miracle. A symbol of hope when all seems lost. A lesson in faith when the world says it's impossible. And today, we'll uncover the true meaning behind Moses and the Red Sea, how faith split an ocean. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe to our channel, because the journeys of faith, miracles, and history we share here are stories you won't want to miss. The story of Moses and the Red Sea is not confined to one faith, one book, or one people. It lives in the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran. It has echoed for thousands of years across Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions. It is a story not only of a people escaping an empire, but of faith rising against fear, of miracles breaking the laws of nature. For the Jewish people, this moment is central to their identity. The Exodus from Egypt is celebrated every year at Passover, the festival of freedom. It is a reminder that God delivers his people from slavery and oppression, no matter how powerful the enemy may seem. For Christians, the Red Sea crossing becomes a symbol of salvation itself, a foreshadowing of deliverance through Christ. Just as Israel passed through the waters into freedom, believers see in it the image of passing from bondage into new life. For Muslims, the Quran tells of Musa, God's prophet, who led the children of Israel out of Pharaoh's grip by divine command. The story is remembered during Ashura, a day of fasting and reflection, as a symbol of victory of truth over tyranny. Even beyond religion, this story has seeped into art, culture, and literature. Painters have tried to capture the majesty of walls of water. Poets have written of the terror of Pharaoh's army and the relief of freedom. Historians have debated whether a natural phenomenon could explain the parting of the sea. But at its core, the story remains universal. Why? Because all of us know what it feels like to be trapped. To stand before an ocean of problems with no way forward. To feel the enemy of fear or despair racing behind us. And all of us long for a miracle, a way through the impossible. The Red Sea story is not just Israel's. It belongs to all of humanity. It is the story of the oppressed seeking freedom. Of faith opening doors where none exist. And of hope becoming stronger than fear. The Israelites saw only two things, a raging sea before them, and Pharaoh's army behind them. In human terms, there was no escape. Logic said, you are doomed. But faith does not operate by human logic. Moses stood before the same sea. He heard the same army thundering closer. He felt the same fear in the air. But he also carried something else, the promise of God. And so he raised his staff, not because he saw a way, but because he believed God would make one. This is where the heart of the miracle lies. Not just in the splitting of the waters, but in the courage to act before the waters moved. Faith is not waiting until you see the path, it's stepping forward when there is none, trusting that one will appear. We all face red seas in life, moments where the future looks blocked, where options vanish, where fear drowns us. And like the Israelites, we often cry out, why did you bring us here? We were safer in Egypt." Fear clings to the familiar, even if the familiar is slavery. But Moses shows us another way. Faith looks at the impossible and declares, "There will be a way." And so the sea parts. Dry land appears. The impossible becomes reality. Not because of human strength, but because faith invited divine power to move. This lesson remains timeless. When life corners you, when the odds stack against you, when every path seems blocked, remember the Red Sea. Faith is not about escaping fear. It is about moving forward through it, trusting that the ocean itself will step aside when it must. The crossing of the Red Sea was not only a breathtaking miracle, it was the moment of deliverance, the birth of freedom for a people who had known nothing but chains. For generations, the Israelites had bent under the whip of Egyptian masters, building monuments for a pharaoh who claimed to be a god. Their lives were defined by slavery, their days by suffering. Egypt had the armies, the wealth, the power. Israel had nothing but faith. And yet, when the sea opened, the powerless walked free. For the first time in centuries, men and women who had been slaves stepped onto land not as captives, but as a people delivered. Every step between those walls of water was a step away from oppression, away from cruelty, away from despair. With every footprint in the sand, they were leaving behind chains and stepping toward destiny. This is why the Exodus is more than just history. It is a symbol. The Red Sea was not simply a barrier of water, it was a barrier of slavery, of fear, of oppression. And when it split, it declared to the world that no empire, no tyrant, no chain is stronger than the will of God to set his people free. But notice something important: freedom did not come without fear. The Israelites had to walk through the sea, with towering walls of water threatening to collapse on either side. Freedom always requires courage. Deliverance always demands faith. That same truth echoes in our lives today. Many of us are still standing at our own Red Seas, trapped between the slavery of the past and the uncertainty of the future. For some, it is the slavery of addiction. For others, the chains of fear, doubt, or toxic relationships. And often, like Israel, we hesitate. The sea looks too dangerous, the path too uncertain. But the story of the Red Sea reminds us. Deliverance comes not to those who stand still, but to those who step forward in faith. When the Israelites reached the far shore and turned back, the sight was unforgettable. Behind them, the sea closed. Pharaoh's army, chariots, horses, and soldiers, vanished beneath the waves. For the first time, the Israelites could breathe freely. Their enemy was gone. Their chains were broken. Their freedom was real. The Red Sea crossing is not just the story of one nation, it is the eternal declaration that no power can keep God's people enslaved forever. It is the reminder that oppression always has an end, that hope always has a path, and that freedom is worth the courage it requires. The Israelites did not just escape Egypt, they stepped into a new identity. No longer slaves, they were now a free people, guided by God Himself. The Red Sea was not just an escape route, it was the doorway into destiny. The Red Sea was not only a passage of freedom for the Israelites. It was also a place of judgment for Pharaoh and his army. This part of the story is as sobering as it is powerful, because it reveals a timeless truth: oppression does not last forever. For centuries, Egypt had stood as the mightiest empire on earth. Pharaoh sat on a golden throne, worshipped as a god, feared as a tyrant. He commanded armies that seemed unstoppable. He believed his power had no limits. When Moses first stood in his court and declared, "Let my people go," Pharaoh laughed. Who was this shepherd to challenge a king? Who was the God of Israel to oppose the gods of Egypt? But plague after plague fell. Egypt trembled. The Nile turned to blood, the land was covered with darkness, the firstborn of Egypt perished. And still, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Pride blinded him. Even when the Israelites left, he refused to let them go. With rage burning in his chest, he summoned his army and chased them to the very edge of the sea. But in that moment, the tables turned. What Pharaoh thought was his victory became his downfall. He entered the path through the sea, convinced that his chariots could roll where God's people walked. But the path of deliverance was not his to claim. The waters that had opened for the oppressed now closed upon the oppressor. The mighty army that once enslaved thousands was swept away in an instant, swallowed by waves they could not control. This was not just destruction, it was divine justice. The Red Sea declared to the world that arrogance has an end, that tyranny collapses, and that no throne, no crown, no empire can stand forever against the will of God. Notice the detail: the Israelites crossed safely, every man, woman, and child. Not one was lost. But Pharaoh's army, trained and armed, drowned. The weak were saved, the mighty were broken. It was not about strength, it was about righteousness. The lesson echoes across history. In every age, empires rise, powers boast, leaders grow arrogant. They enslave, they oppress, they believe their reign is eternal. But the story of the Red Sea whispers across time: no empire lasts forever. Justice will come. This is not just a lesson for nations, it is also personal. In our lives, too, we face pharaohs, people, fears, or systems that try to dominate us, that tell us we will never be free. But just as the sea closed over Pharaoh's chariots, so too will every force of oppression fall. The Red Sea reminds us that deliverance is not only about escaping, it is also about seeing justice done. The God who opens seas for his people also brings down the proud who refuse to listen. The waters of freedom can also be the waters of judgment. The parting of the Red Sea was not just a moment in history, it became a legacy, a story passed down through generations, retold for over 3,000 years. It was more than an escape, more than a miracle. It became a promise of hope for all who would ever feel trapped, for all who would ever need deliverance. For the Jewish people, this event is at the very heart of their identity. Every year at Passover, families gather to remember the Exodus. They eat unleavened bread, they tell the story of slavery and freedom, and they remind their children, "We were slaves in Egypt, but God brought us out with a mighty hand." The crossing of the Red Sea is not distant history, it is a living memory, woven into their songs, prayers, and festivals. For Christians, the Red Sea foreshadows salvation. The Apostle Paul once wrote that Israel's journey through the waters was like baptism, passing from bondage into new life. Just as the sea closed over the old, so too does faith close the door on sin and open the path to freedom. It is a reminder that God still parts seas, still makes a way where there is none. For Muslims, the Quran preserves the story of Musa, the prophet who led his people out of oppression. His courage, his patience, and his faith serve as timeless lessons. The moment of deliverance at the sea is remembered on the day of Ashura, a day of fasting and reflection, when believers recall how God rescues the faithful from their enemies. But this legacy goes beyond religion. Artists, poets, and storytellers across centuries have been inspired by the sight of waters rising like walls, by the image of slaves walking into freedom, by the justice that came crashing down on Pharaoh's army. The story of the Red Sea has been painted on canvases, carved into stone, and written into literature. It is not just Israel's story, it is humanity's. Why does it still move us today? Because the Red Sea is more than water. It is every barrier we face, every fear that seems too great, every enemy that seems too strong. And the story declares: no ocean is too wide, no chain too strong, no Pharaoh too powerful when faith leads the way. The legacy of the Red Sea is the legacy of hope. It is the assurance that the impossible can happen, that the oppressed can be free, that justice will prevail, and that even when the sea stands in front of us, the path will open. And so, generation after generation, the story continues to inspire. Not just as an ancient memory, but as a living promise. When faith steps forward, the waters will part. So what does the story of Moses and the Red Sea teach us today? That no matter how trapped we feel, no matter how powerful the obstacles before us, faith can open a way. The Israelites stood before an ocean with nowhere to run, and yet, when they trusted, the impossible happened. The waters split. Freedom came. Justice fell. And hope was born. This story is not locked away in the past, it is alive right now. It reminds us that oppression doesn't last forever, that tyrants eventually fall, and that even the seas in our own lives, our fears, our struggles, our chains, can part when faith leads the way. The Red Sea was more than a miracle. It was a message, that deliverance belongs to the faithful, and that hope is always stronger than fear. And if this journey inspired you, imagine the other stories still waiting to be told, ancient miracles, timeless wisdom, and faith that shaped the world. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even the sea can split for faith. Because the stories we tell here aren't just about history, they're about all of us.